that not every issue falls within our jurisdiction. You could give us more of that if you like, but not every issue falls within our jurisdiction. But if it is not under our control, we're going to get you to the right place. Nothing frustrated me more as a legislator than to have a constituent issue and forward it on to an agency and never to get a response back. I can't guarantee that you or your constituent will always be pleased with the result we get back, but I can guarantee you will get a response back from the insurance department. We take that very seriously. So the contact information, well, like insurance.ks.gov is our website. It sends the information we're going to give you. 1-800-432-2484 is a number I've memorized. You can wake me up in the middle of the night and I can spit that number out to you. But that's a consumer assistance division. You can also file, you or your constituents can file a complaint online. So I went fairly quickly because, Mr. Chairman, I didn't want to take up Lee's time and have him whine about it to me tomorrow. So I do want to thank you again for the opportunity to present today. I would be happy to stand for any questions if you would like that, Mr. Chairman, or otherwise I do want to thank you again for your hearing on House Bill 2072 and 2074 today. It means a lot to us to have a hearing this early and to be able to hopefully get our legislative agenda out of your way early. And so I will leave it with Lee unless you'd like to have me answer questions, Mr. Chairman.
That's great, Commissioner Schmidt. Very quickly, are there any questions, committee? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My speaker coming through okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
You are awesome. We appreciate everything you're doing, and we do appreciate you sending a great delegate from your thing. I just had a couple quick questions. The first one had to do with, and I appreciate you talking about your national conventions and your group of insurance commissioners. So when you have these national meetings, what kind of feedback do you get about the ability of having, I'm trying to think of the word, reciprocity, is that what I'm looking for, between states? So if I'm in Oklahoma or Colorado or somewhere and I know there's insurance agents that do this in the southern Kansas, but that they can have a license in Oklahoma, a license in Kansas, and still have very similar tests. What are you hearing about that kind of crossover of states?
Well, you know, about 50%, over 50% of our agents are actually licensed in other states. If you're home licensed with us, over 50% of them are licensed in other states. So it's a fairly easy process to undertake. One of the issues that I believe Lee will speak to you about in this producer licensing bill is one of the problems we have is with the continuing education requirement and some of the issues that provides. But as long as they meet their continuing education requirements in the states that they're reciprocating to and fill out the appropriate forms, they can do that. So, you know, I think every state, as you know, when you can buy insurance on an app now, as opposed to sitting down with your agent like old school days when my parents bought insurance, they demanded and desired a personal relationship with their agent. Now that world is changing very rapidly. Our millennials just want to do it as quick as possible, put their credit card information in and be done with it. And they don't really care so much about, well, I don't want to say they don't care about relationships, but they approach it differently. So the reciprocation between the states is more important now than ever.
Thank you very much. Just adding on to that, though, so if I take my tests in Oklahoma, do I have 100% ability to move my license and use my license in Kansas?
There is a process, but no, you just can't come over with can't just say, I want to be in all 50 states. There is a process. But it is I would say it is a pretty painless process, and it certainly can be done very easily. I mean, especially since, like I said, over 50% of our agents are licensed in other states, and the rest, the bulk of our non-resident license. I mean, it's a huge number of people that have non-resident licenses.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions.
Any other questions in the room or online? Seeing none at the moment, we'll turn it over to Lee, and if you did have a question, just get in our queue and we'll follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I really appreciate your time. Good luck with the rest of this session.
And is Lee coming on at this time, or is
Yep.
he going to be testifying at bill time?
Mr. Chairman, I think probably makes sense to go over those, any additional questions at bill time, if that works for you.
That would work just fine. So thanks, and we'll see you back shortly. So
All right.
if that concludes our presentation or update from the Insurance Department, we are ready to move on to House Bill 2072, and I'd begin with an overview from the Revisor's Office. Is our revisor online for 2072?
Hello, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Yes, this is David Weiss with the Revisor's Office. I think Eileen was going to speak to the bill, but I think she's having some connectivity issues. So just give us a second here. I can pull that up.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, we could hear you.
I apologize. My connection's zooming in and dropping out intermittently. But House Bill 2072 is our annual date change bill. It amends KSA 40-2C01. And what that does is pertain to the risk-based capital instructions. It amends the definition of risk-based capital. So each year, insurers are required to file the risk-based capital report with the Commissioner of Insurance and with the NAIC in accordance with the formula set forth in the risk-based capital instructions. And these instructions change each year because the effective date of the instructions that insurers use to file the report changes every year to the last day of the preceding year. So you can see that amendment occurs on page 2 of the bill in line 2, where the date changes from December 31st of 2019 to December 31st of 2020.
Thank you. Are there questions for the revisor? Seeing none, it's always risky to say, but this may be as simple a bill as I've seen in terms of striking one number in one line. So that's an encouraging start. So with that, I don't believe that there is a fiscal note on this one, so we can move directly along. We have one proponent. Lee Modisett, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought I might just touch briefly for the committee members who haven't served on this committee before. Risk-based capital, the reason we do this on an annual basis rather than ceding the authority and allowing it to go forward in perpetuity is this allows us to maintain state control over the adoption of these standards. Each year, these are typically pretty minor, but periodically there could be substantial changes to risk-based capital. And if we were to cede the state's authority over this, we would have no say in the adoption of those standards. So while we don't foresee any issues with the adoption of these standards, it's a pretty lengthy process by the time it makes its way through the NAIC. This just allows us to maintain that state authority, and it's why we have to come back each year for a date change.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Modisett, committee? I might ask just a couple. Do you know how many years we have gone this way?
since 2009, I believe.
So thank you. And while it's not related to this bill, which is only dealing with the date change, do you see any changes in the risk-based capital?
Nothing that would rise to the level of substantive at this point, no.
Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for the testimony. That is all that I have as listed conferees on 2072. Is there anyone else wishing to appear as a proponent of 2072? Seeing none, is there anyone wishing to appear as an opponent of 2072? And anyone neutral? Anyone at all on 2072? Seeing none, we will close the hearing. Committee, we will look to vote on this, possibly not on Monday if our day is too full, but definitely by Wednesday if we have not. So this will be brought up for final action soon in the committee. We might have done it today had we not had the online piece and the various things and the possibility of difficulty voting for some members. So thank you for that. That will take us to our next bill, House Bill 2074, and we'd again start with an overview from the reviser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House Bill 2074 amends KSA 2020 Sup 40-4902, 40-4903, 40-4905, 40-4909, 40-4912, and 40-4915 of the Uniform Insurance Agents Licensing Act and KSA 5505 and 5512 of the Public Adjusters Licensing Act. And it also amends KSA 40-241 pertaining to examination of applicants for licensure as an agent. So starting with Section 1, KSA 40-241, as I said, pertains to examination of individual applicants for agents' licenses. So under current law, if an individual fails to pass the licensure examination, that individual may retake the examination following a waiting period of not less than 7 days. So that would be the applicant's second try.
While we await the rejoining of our reviser, are there particular areas of the bill that anyone had questions coming in and how it is written? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have several, so if somebody else has questions, I'll.
So what I might do, Mr. Weiss, are you able to hear us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
If you would gather the questions as they might relate to the revisor's office and relay those to Eileen, that would be great. And then if our conferees are able to hear the questions and if you have an answer forthcoming, that would be helpful. But Representative Riley, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, how many insurance exams does Kansas have? Unique exams. Maybe that's a research question rather than a advisor question.
Mr. Chairman.
Maybe Lee, you know that question.
Yeah, I mean, primarily you're going to have kind kind of two lines of authority, generally property casualty, and then health and life. And then, when you sit for the exam, there's kind of a national exam, and then depending on which line of authority you're looking, whether that be just property casualty or just health and life.
Right.
Those
Under each one of those, Lee, there is specific exams. So what is the total exact, if I took all the exams, not securities, just insurance, how many would I take?
If you're doing kind of, again, the traditional licensing, you'd have, and you're doing dual license, you'd have 3 total. You'd have the state, you'd have the state for the property casualty, the state for health life, and then the national exam.
Oh, you're saying 3. No
Yep.
minor boiler licensing, all those other reliability licensing?
There are some limited lines, but candidly, I'm not as familiar with how the licensing process works on the limited line.
So my second question then is, so is this $4 biennial renewal, is this based on each one of those lines or on your total license?
It's just on you, the applicant. So it's $4, period. It doesn't matter how many licenses you're renewing.
Okay, and then there was the terminology public adjuster. I'm not familiar with that. Could you explain that to me?
Yeah, it's not that common anymore, but what we're trying to achieve with the public adjuster is sometime back, prior to Commissioner Schmidt, the state had adopted the fingerprinting standards that were kind of a national requirement for insurance agent applicants, and public adjusters weren't included in that originally. That was kind of an oversight. And so this puts the public adjuster folks on the same level playing field if they were to be a new applicant as the rest of the industry.
So Lee, is a public adjuster the people that work for the commission, the insurance companies that go out and adjust liability on a hailstorm or something like that? Is that who we're talking about?
Well, they don't work for the companies. That's what makes them a little bit different, where, now it's pretty common for companies to send their adjusters out themselves, and it's handled through that process. So sometime back, it used to be, the thought was these kind of neutral parties advocated better for the consumer, but now it's usually handled between the consumer and the company.
So these adjusters for these different companies, are they licensed, or are they just certified or hired at random by those insurance companies?
They time back, used to be, the thought was these kind of neutral parties advocated better for the consumer, but I don't know if anybody else got a lot of feedback there. Sorry. I'm looking to see here if I can get a quick answer for that on you. I don't know how the companies themselves go through that process, so I'll have to get that answer for you.
Thank you. I see that someone else has got a question, so I'm going to waive.
Thank you. And Committee on Questions, we may have some for a number of the conferees as well. Were there any specific to the revisor? Seeing no, oh, Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On Section 8 of this proposed bill, it talks about the addition of a background check and criminal history. I'm just curious what offenses do and do not qualify someone from getting a license.
Hang on just a second here. I'm pulling up the bill. Representative, what page was the question from?
I'm looking at the bill brief, and it says
Okay.
in section 8 where it amends 405505.
Hang on just a second.
20, page 20. I'm just wondering what offenses are
So each, those are, I'm trying to get to the section here. There's an entire process handled internally with the department of what we look at when somebody applies, not just the offense itself, but what was the recency, how, what type of offense was it? Certainly, we're going to look harder at things related to, financial than, say, somebody who had a minor misdemeanor 20 years ago. So I can get you a little bit more detail of what that, follow up with more detail of kind of what that looks like, if you would like.
But you'd say it's sort of at the discretion of the department.
No, so it's defined. The factors that are used are established case law and factors that the Supreme Court has looked at for other licenses as well. So it's not arbitrary by any stretch of the imagination.
And just to follow up on that, if I may, if Representative Proctor is done. The Section 8 does only refer to the public adjuster's licensing. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Are there other questions at this time, or shall we move into our proponent testimony to get a little more of an overview? Has our revisor rejoined the call? Seeing none there. Thanks for the thorough reading of the bill by the members of the committee, and sorry to short circuit the full explanation.
I mean, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Yeah, Eileen is having problems rejoining the meeting. I can read through the rest of the brief if that would be acceptable, or you can move into the proponent testimony. There's no specific questions about the bill.
So with, I might just check with the committee. How many have had a chance to read that brief previously, or would you like to have that read? Have already read it. We wouldn't have to make David read it for us. If you'd like that overview, we can take that moment. Do I get any feedback one way or the other? Sounds like go ahead and move ahead. Representative Bourgeon. Okay. So given that, we will continue to look at the brief. Thank you for offering to take that on for us, Revisor Weiss, and we will plow ahead. And if we have other questions for the revisor, we may need to circle back. So thank you. With that, we will move into our proponent testimony, and I might start with Mr. Modisette, in that you may be able to answer a few of the questions up front that we don't have to hit all of our professionals with as we go down the line. So you have the floor.
Word of 2020, I'm on mute. Sorry about that. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you here virtually. Certainly would rather be in person, but kind of is what it is. So I appreciate the accommodation. The primary changes to this bill stem with two components. One related to company appointments, and the second related to how we handle continuing education. A lot of the other components to the bill already exist in regulation. The thought process from the department behind putting them in legislation is that it's much more upfront and codified in statute. A lot of times folks look in statute and forget to look through the administrative regulations. So my testimony will focus on the benefits from the department's standpoint of these particular changes. The first I'll take is the how companies appoint agents. Kansas currently is the only state in the country that requires an automatic appointment of every agent within an agency. So what this means is that I'll use my own policy as an example. If I have a policy through MetLife and I'm working with my local agent, not every agent in that agency necessarily writes for MetLife, but under Kansas statute, MetLife has to appoint every agent at that agency. And this ultimately leads to pretty significant fee bill to companies, and it has generated an excessive amount of revenue for the department, particularly as we continue to see the move to online and kind of centralized call center type arrangements with agents. So this would eliminate that requirement. Again, we're the only state in the country that requires this. We believe this is a win on both accounts because we get a lot of questions about this in our office every single year. So we spend a lot of staff time trying to justify and explain when a company gets that bill, why that bill is so large. And it also better aligns with and reflects what the industry is used to in every other state. So ultimately, that will result in about $5.2 million a year. If our estimates are right, as far as the number of agents that will no longer be appointed, that will result in $5.2 million loss in revenue each year to the department. But we believe, again, that this is a good, sound business practice and is the right public policy moving forward. As you might imagine, if we're losing that revenue, that means this revenue will stay with companies. Other proponents can talk about the concern of these fees being passed on to agents and the continued effort to reduce costs from a company standpoint, which then passes that burden on to agents. So we are trying to keep this as business friendly as possible. The second primary change that we make is really designed to, again, make it easier to do business in Kansas and make the licensing process simpler. So Kansas has our own licensing database for for our resident agents, and that we maintain on our own server. We keep, we have to do all the maintenance updates, things like that. Every other state is able to utilize a product called NIPR, which is the National Insurance Producer Registry. And on an individual basis, logging on to two separate platforms to renew your license probably isn't too terribly large of a burden. But when you start talking compliance and doing that for multiple agents at a particular time, this creates an excess burden in many ways for the industry and trying to make sure that they're staying compliant and keeping their folks' licenses up to date. Kansas is also the only state that requires the renewal by a birth date as opposed to birth month. So this kind of gets a little bit into some oddities and technicalities with how we handle our licensing process. But ultimately, what we're trying to achieve here is getting in line with how every other state does it. So every other state does not distinguish from a continuing ed standpoint between health and life hours versus property casualty hours. And what that, you still would have to pass a licensing exam for each of those lines. So you couldn't pass only, property casualty and be able to sell health life, but it eliminates the distinction. And one of the benefits to that is our producer licensing division actually receives more calls than our consumer assistance division. And the vast majority of those calls are from agents not understanding, hey, I have 26 hours. I'm a dual licensed agent. Why do I have to take more hours? Well, it's because, 15 of those hours are health and life, and, the difference is in property casualty, so they don't meet the 12 per line. This eliminates distinction, and it moves it to 18 hours in general. 3 of those have to be ethics. The national licensing standard, which is adopted by the vast majority of other states, is 24 hours. We brought a bill last year that had the standard at 24 hours. However, for a variety of reasons, that didn't make it across the finish line last year, and we sat back down with all the folks who would be impacted by this and asked, what does getting support for the bill across the industry look like? And so we worked with a number of interested folks who said, hey, for our single line agents, you're asking them to double the CEs. Can we meet in the middle here? So we settled on 18 hours. It is below the national standard, but we do believe that this still provides an adequate amount of continuing education while eliminating our concern about reciprocity. Representative Riley asked about that earlier. Ultimately, we have to get to one number of CEs, and we felt like if we went below 18, we could really run into issues of other states not accepting our licenses. So what that looks like from a agent standpoint on our end is that when they log on to the ultimate goal and benefit here would be able to log on to NIPR and take care of all of your licenses in every state that you want to do business in through the same centralized database. So right now, you do your Kansas, then you log on to NIPR, and let's say you wanted to do Missouri and Oklahoma and Nebraska, you would have to do that in a separate system. This change really allows us to have all of that a one-stop shop, if you will. Commissioner in her remarks talked about how Kansas was the first state in the country to get our producer licensing testing centers back open and our fingerprinting back open. So at the end of the day, the objective from the department here is to create efficiencies for us. One of the challenges that we had early on is that because our licensing database is our own and it's on our own server, we certainly weren't anticipating being remote, and we didn't have a high number of VPNs and secure access to that server. So when you're trying to keep folks able to keep doing their job from home in a safe manner, moving to a web-based platform, which is what this would do, would really improve our operations, and frankly, it would save us an incredible amount of administrative time because again, most of the calls that we get are in our producer licensing division are from agents who aren't understanding why they have to take more hours if they have the total of right now dual license would be 24. So we believe that this is the right balance of public policy and a good compromise between the department's interest and the industry's interest in making this state easier to do business in.
Conclude your testimony?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Committee questions, we have one online. Is there any in the room? Representative Riley and then Representative Collins. Representative Riley, you have the floor for question.
A couple quick questions. One of the comments, or one of the things that was in this new bill was that, this has been in there before, but, if you had any changes in, anything from, I think the terminology was workplace or whatever. So did agents, when they started working at home, did they have to start telling you that they are no longer working at that agency at so-and-so Main Street, that they are now at home?
So that's not really what we're after there. What we're trying to solve with some of those notification things is that without getting into any specific cases, we've ran into situations where, and I would note that a lot of the notices to us of change in address and things like that are already, again, required by reg, but don't always happen. So this is, again, trying to just make it easier and more upfront, or in folks' face, if you will. What we're trying to solve there is that we've ran into situations where we've had an agent act inappropriately, and we've sent them notice to the address that we have on file, and for a variety of reasons, they may no longer be at that address, and so they never respond to us. And then we get to the end of this kind of process that we have in place of trying to correct the behavior. And we get to the end with no response, and we're looking at, having to consider revoking the license based on the particular behavior. And then we get the statement of, well, I never got those notices, and so we're trying to make sure that we're completely upfront and clear with folks about what they need to update with us and when. There's part of the purpose of the agency renewal process. We don't have that for Kansas agencies right now, is that we have every year, there's probably hundreds of agencies that are no longer operating in Kansas, but because there's not a renewal process, we don't know that. It's a pretty inefficient process on our end, where we literally have gone and checked the obituaries and death records to see if that particular agency owner is still even, alive, and let alone conducting business. So a lot of those sorts of changes are designed to clean up that process and make sure that we have the most up-to-date information as possible.
Yeah, I understand, that same section talked about, felonies or any misdemeanor, not misdemeanors, but felonies. So that brings me to the point that you just brought out. So in your bill, it doesn't specify, but it says 15 days. So is that 15 days from a postmark from your office out and then back? Because we are having some real slow mail delivery back and forth right now. And so that's not well defined of what that 15 days includes, or whether that's 15 days of business days or anything. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't just send notices in the mail. One of the issues, though, right now is that you're not necessarily required to provide an email to us or a phone number, things like that, to keep that up to date. Folks will, change those or what have you. So, we're going to make the best effort to contact an agent with every point of contact that we have with them. Certainly our interest is making sure that we get the agents. Not every complaint that we get about an agent has merit to it, but we need to. Our task as a regulator is to investigate those and protect Kansas consumers. And we have seen scenarios where it's not just 15 days is what, which is 15 business days, is what companies already have to have as a response when we get a complaint from a consumer. They have 15 business days to respond to us. That can simply be, hey, we've got your request and we're looking into it further. Can we get an extension? It doesn't necessarily mean the issue is resolved in those 15 days, but I can't get into the specific examples that we have, but I can tell you that there have been agents that we have dealt with where it has been months of trying to resolve a particular matter. And again, at the end of the day, what we're ultimately trying to determine is whether or not this agent acted inappropriately and caused harm to a consumer.
Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering about reciprocity. Now, you mentioned that if our requirements were too light, I guess, on continuing education, that might make it an issue on getting licensed in other states. Does the state of Kansas actually make agreements with other states for reciprocity, or is it just an automatic thing if their guidelines are close to ours, that it's that we accept it or not?
Yeah, so there's no, that's a good question. There's no kind of formalized agreement from state to state. There's this, the general licensing model reg and statutes address a lot of the reciprocity. But at the end of the day, you know, each state within reason is going to trust that if you pass your home state exam and you're being properly, you have proper oversight in your state, that you're capable of acting professionally and appropriately in another state. One of the reasons that you don't want to go too low is you don't want to be that first state that deals with a commissioner who says, hey, wait a minute, our folks are doing 24 hours here and you want to let your agents who are dual licensed do 12. You know, that's that's not only unfair from a CE standpoint and from a business standpoint, but we also have questions about whether or not your agents are adequately educated and trained. So 18, the lowest in the country, is our next door neighbor of Missouri at 16. We didn't want to be, we never really like to be in line with Missouri. We like to be at least a little bit better if we can. So 18 was the number we came to. That for single line agents is 6 more hours than current, and for dual licensed agents, which is a little over half, 55% of agents in Kansas, that's a net reduction of 6 hours. So the majority of agents are actually going to be looking at fewer total minimum CEs. You know, I think a lot of the other proponents will talk about they are professionals and they care about their profession. So a lot of agents already exceed the 24. So this is really designed to help find that middle ground between the folks who were originally looking at having to double the number of CEs. So because Missouri has 16 and has not ran into reciprocity issues, we feel like 18 is a good number to be at and do not have concern that other states would not accept our agents.
All right. Thank you very much.
Other questions, committee? Representative Riley.
I would thank Lee, appreciate his time here, but I also would appreciate the fact that he's willing to say that his department is overcharging businesses $5.2 million. That was a pretty interesting confession. Thank you, Lee.
Further questions, committee? So, and thank you, Representative Riley. I actually did have a brief question on that. As the revenue goes down by that amount, I'm sure the department has looked at that. Do we know how much is swept or has been swept historically from the insurance budget, or what might be the counterbalance to where we don't need that money? Sure.
That's a good question, Representative. The insurance department actually has in statute a protection against fee sweeps. And there had been a previous attempt there had been previous successful attempt to sweep those fees, which ultimately led to a lawsuit filing that was settled a little over a year and a half ago, I believe. Candidly, by settled, I mean we got the money back and avoided having to, spend more money on attorneys to fight what appeared to be a pretty straightforward case. So the insurance department on the insurance side of the operation does not does not have the additional or revenue that exceeds our operational expenses swept. So it stays in our fee fund. And given the nature of, like I said, the way insurance agents are licensed today, that agency appointment process has existed, I believe, since the 80s. And at one point in time, maybe that made sense. But now with the ability to, we have 130 to 150,000 out-of-state agents who, are licensed to do business in Kansas. The vast majority of that's going to take place online. Just the way the industry has evolved and changed, is completely different than when this appointment process was originally instituted. So previous commissioners have looked at this and taken a slightly different approach. This producer licensing initiative has been, a 20, 30-year issue as well. And previously there had been attempts to basically make it revenue neutral. We took a little bit of a different approach and looked at it from a standpoint of, do we actually need to be revenue neutral, or can the department afford to take a revenue hit and still continue to do what we're tasked to do by the legislature? And because of that change in the industry and how how agents are doing business today, we generate not quite double the amount of money of our budget. So we have the cushion in there to afford to take this hit. Again, we wanted to take a little bit of a different look and approach than had been done previously. And certainly legislature may add things over the years and ask us to do more. And I can't predict the future to know if the revenue that we bring in now will be adequate in the future. But based on as it is today in our operations today, we do not foresee an issue going forward of needing to come back and ask for fees of a different variety. We feel like this is something that we can absorb and, frankly, maybe could have been done sooner, but we're trying to solve it today.
Thank you. I believe that is our questions at the moment, and we will move to our next conferees and really appreciate the patience of our industry experts. I am most excited to hear your take on it, so thank you for being with us. I hope you found it helpful for us to exercise our detailed questions on the insurance department first. And the order that I have just for your expectation would be Zach, Sue Ann, and Beth on my sheet. So Mr. Anschutz with Advisors Excel, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. You have my written testimony, so in the interest of brevity, I'm not going to repeat that. Just a couple points that I do want to raise here, and this is kind of odd coming from us, I think, as an industry entity, but we really support a well-regulated industry, and the reason that we do that is because we are the largest field marketing organization in the country. And we believe that having a well-regulated industry levels the playing field. I can tell you from my personal experience, the hardest thing I deal with is an advisor who tells me, why are you telling me that I can't do this when the guy down the street's doing the exact same thing? That's problematic for us. So just with interest, with respect to the insurance department, they do a tremendous job of regulating that. And so, I know that the $5.2 million, obviously is coming from the pockets of producers and things like that. But as long as we can keep that department staffed and regulating to the level they are, we're very, very supportive of that. I will say that with respect to what Lee said about NIPR, that is something that would be tremendously beneficial. We actually have an entire department in our company of over 600 employees that deals with licensing and registration across the country. We have advisors in all 50 states. And so that is something that keeps multiple people employed full time. So any consistency that we can have there is very, very beneficial. And I would also say that as far as the continuing education goes, a well-educated agent force is absolutely critical. It used to be, for our particular industry, fixed indexed annuities, that the annuity applications were 1 to 2 pages long, very, very simple, not that big of an issue. Now they're 20 pages long, right? So we want to make sure that we want to have a very well-versed and educated agent field, because at the end of the day, that reflects poorly upon the industry. You look at the SEC and the regulation of Bernie Madoff, things like that. Those reflect poorly upon the industry, and we want to be good shepherds of individuals' retirement. And the final thing that I will say on the 15-day response time, we've had to respond to inquiries across the country, and this is pretty consistent. And the reason I think that 15 days, in my experience, the department's always been very good about letting people, if they respond and say, hey, can I have a little bit more time, extending that deadline. So it's not always a hard stop. Now, I can't speak for the current administration, but that's not always been a hard stop. But on the other end of that response is usually a consumer who 15 days seems like a really long time for them to have to wait for a response if they're trying to resolve an insurance issue. And so I think the department has been very, very good in dealing with that in the past. But on the whole, we do support this bill and urge it for passage. So thank you for your time today. We appreciate it.
For your testimony and sticking with committee. Committee, are there any questions for our conferee? Seeing none, the one thing that I would be curious if anyone wishes to address, and it can go back to Lee as well. I know one of the things that has been worked on is the CE. I don't have a suggestion for a better solution than what is in the bill, but I'm curious if there are any concerns about the dual and single license both being at 18 hours, or the increase for one and the decrease for the other, if that is what we find to be the most sensible way to go forward.
I can speak from an industry perspective and tell you that that's not necessarily problematic for us. That's actually, I'm an attorney, so that's consistent with what you have in the legal field. I know your CE hours don't relate specifically to those particular those particular subject matters, but if you have well-versed, educated professionals, they're going to want to have their CE consistent with that. But I think that this is a really good compromise, and it gives them the opportunity to get those CE hours in the field, in the field, but also if they need to go specifically to those particular areas, we would support that.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions at this time, thank you for your testimony. And we will move to Ms. Schultz with Kansas IMA Financial Group. Excuse me, I need to keep on the same line. So thank you for being here and your patience with committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be with you and with the committee, and I appreciate this opportunity to speak on behalf of House Bill 2074. You have my written testimony. Like Zach, I won't read it to you, but I do want to highlight a few key pieces of information. For your knowledge, IMA is the 28th largest insurance broker in the United States. We are the 6th largest independent, and independence to us is critical. It means employee owned. I have 447 employee owners. And we also happen to be the largest broker in the state of Kansas that's domiciled in the state. We were created in Kansas. We grew up in Kansas. We have a lot of offices in Kansas, and I have about 330 employees in Kansas. So our roots are here, and we are extremely proud of our connection with the state. We are fully supportive of this legislation as proposed by the Kansas Insurance Department. There's a lot of cleanup provisions, as you've already identified, but there are 3 key substantive provisions that IMA is most concerned about. First of all, it clarifies the authority of the Kansas Insurance Commissioner's Office to regulate our business. And I agree with Zach. We are committed to being professionals in the insurance industry. We appreciate sound, reasonable, business sensible regulation that protects consumers. And I believe that the Kansas Insurance Department is an outstanding regulator. We deal with all 50 regulators across the United States, and we've found them to be incredibly informative, professional. They're very responsive, and they're a regulator that we like to work with. And I've worked with quite a few of them, and I would not necessarily say that about all regulators. Second, it does revise the continuing education requirements, and it does change it to the 18-hour biennial requirement that's been laid out. We have been very concerned about moving to 24 hours. While the states do honor your home state license CE requirements, so to that question of reciprocity that came up earlier, as long as your state regulator has the examinations and you obtain the CE that your state domiciled regulator requires, then you can seek a non-resident license in another state to do business in that state. The challenge that we foresaw several years ago is the passage of NARAB and NARAB 2. That is an attempt to create a national licensing regime. And it may eventually require the 24 hours. And so that's really what promulgated our move to try to bring Kansas more to a national standard. I know KAI is going to testify, and we're a member of KAI. And they worked with the insurance department to come up with the 18-hour compromise. IMA is supportive of the 18 hours. And you'll see in my testimony, we're actually going to pay more. I actually have more individual licensees than I have dual licensees. But as I stated in our testimony, I don't have any problem at all with any of my licensees having more than 24 hours of CE. Our individuals who are working with consumers on insurance on a day-to-day basis, they want to be as educated and informed about insurance as they possibly can be. And so hitting that number of CE requirements, that's not really the driver. It's about what motivates you as a professional to get the education and the information to really do your job for that consumer. So we think the 18-hour requirement is a fair compromise. And if we go to 24 hours in the future so that we are consistent with NARAB 2 requirements, we're also supportive of that. And then the other thing that I just wanted to mention about that process, we do need NYPER CIRCON access for KID, and for the streamlining of the licensing process. It is manual. As Zach said, I have the National Licensing Department for IMA in Topeka, and I have a fabulous staff, and they work with Kansas Insurance Department and Nancy Strasburg hand in hand, but we need that efficiency. And so we really do appreciate the Kansas Insurance Department moving that piece of the legislation forward. Last but not least, let me just touch on the appointments. I think you heard from Lee, we are the only state that requires the appointment of every licensee. And I can tell you, as an organization, as a broker in this state, that's a problem. When you start dealing with the multitude of carriers that we deal with, they are constantly looking for ways to streamline their costs. And we have had carriers try to push that cost for appointing every licensed person onto us instead of them. And their rationale is, listen, you want to try to market one or two policies with us, but we're going to have to go through the process of appointing all of your licensed professionals just to extend this single policy to you for this particular client. That's just inefficient. But more frankly, it can limit the markets, because if we happen to have a carrier that we're trying to get a piece of business written with and we're not appointed, and then maybe it's not one of your national carriers, but it's a smaller carrier, but they've got a really critical coverage that we need for a client, they might just not come to Kansas. They might just say, this is not worth it. Administratively, we don't want to go to that burden or to that expense or to that cost. So we're sorry, but we're not going to extend an appointment to you. We simply don't need it. You heard the Kansas Insurance Department is self-funded on a fee basis. And you heard about the litigation from Lee. The reason that litigation commenced was because of the large amount of surplus funds at the Kansas Insurance Department that was accessed and swept into the state coffers. Industry is paying the fees, and it's industry comprised of carriers, and it's industry comprised of agents and agencies. So we really appreciate Commissioner Schmidt and her department looking at this, saying we can be more efficient as a regulator, eliminate this cost, eliminate this paperwork burden, and assure that we have the same process of all the other states, and that we encourage all the markets to come and do business in our state. That's what's good for consumers. That's what's good for Kansans. Access to markets, fair, competitive pricing, and product. So I would encourage you to pass favorably this legislation, and we look forward to continuing to work with you as we make Kansas the best place to be a business and to represent all of our Kansas clients and consumers. I stand for questions.
Thank you for the testimony committee questions. Double checking, do we have any online? Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Ms. Smoller with the Kansas Association of Insurance Agents. And if I mispronounced your name, please correct me, but the screen is yours.
Thank you. Chairman Johnson, you pronounced it perfectly. So as Chairman Johnson said, my name is Elizabeth Smoller. I am an attorney with the Kansas Association of Insurance Agents. I thank you, Chairman Johnson, and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak before you today. Our association is comprised of over 300 independent insurance agencies in the state of Kansas, and those agencies employ over 2,200 licensed agents. So licensing and agent communication and education is obviously at the forefront of our minds. We worked hand in hand with the insurance department with Commissioner Schmidt's team, including Lee, for several months regarding this legislation. We negotiated many changes in much of the language that is in this bill, and due to that ongoing constant communication with the department, they have put forth a bill that we can fully support. The CE increase, I think, is going to be the biggest change for most agents, most of our agents, obviously. However, as Lee said, more than half of the agents in the state of Kansas are dual licensed. So that change in CE to 18 hours actually reflects a decrease in their hours. We are also supporting this because, quite frankly, being able to use NIPR is a huge efficiency. And I know that Zach and Sue-Ann both spoke to it, and I will speak to it just from a smaller agency standpoint. I myself am not only a licensed attorney, but a licensed insurance agent, and I renewed my license earlier this week. However, I renewed it with 4 of my states online, but then I had to log in separately to the insurance department's website to finish the renewal process with that one completely separate. It would certainly be more efficient, not only from the insurance department's perspective, but from an agent perspective as well, if I could renew all of them at the same time in the same place. So that is one of many reasons that we are supporting this bill. We support creating a renewal process for agencies and cleaning up that list. I think that's a very consumer-friendly thing to do, and also will help the insurance department realize some efficiencies. Making the hours apply for having them be general education hours is also, I think, going to help our agency force quite a bit, help hopefully decrease the amount of inquiries that the producer licensing division receives. And overall, we support this bill. We think it has some great pieces to it. And so I'm not going to go through the rest of my testimony, but did just want to touch on some high points. I also want to mention, I'm sorry that we're not able to be there in person today. Dan Murray is our lobbyist. And so any members of the committee, should you ever have an insurance question, please do not hesitate to reach out to Dan. You can also reach out to Dave Holcher. He's the executive director of KAIA, and obviously you can reach out to myself as well. But I know matters pertaining to insurance are not always easy to understand, and we want you to know that regarding this bill or anything else insurance related that you may come across, we're here to be a resource for you and to provide information to you. And with that, I will stand for any questions that you might have.
Committee questions? Seeing none at this time, thank you for your testimony. So with that committee, I have several written proponents, and who I have as written proponents, I will go through, and then I will ask if anyone else is wishing to appear as a proponent. But I have Eric Stafford with the Kansas Chamber of Commerce, Bob Shields, Kansas Association of Professional Insurance Agents, Tyler Laughlin, American Council of Life Insurers, Scott Colby, National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors of Kansas, and William Sneed, State Farm Insurance. Are any of those, or does anyone else wish to appear as a proponent of House Bill 2074? raised hands online? Seeing none, is there anyone wishing to appear as an opponent of 2074? Anyone neutral? And anyone at all? Seeing none, most importantly, I want to say a huge thanks to those industry folks that shared with us as proponents for your time, not only on the call today, which we greatly appreciate, but your time working with and the time of the insurance department to figure out this issue. Your diligence on that makes our job so much easier to be able to have the chance to get from here to completed, particularly as we might look to a shorter time frame. So a great appreciation for all of you for making that difference for all of the other producers in Kansas. And with that, we will close the hearing on 2074. So I believe that takes care of those items of business. So beyond that, we did have an informational hearing on the credit for reinsurance topic, but I believe we'll dispatch with that until our next meeting as we are approaching 5 o'clock. And to be able to get folks to focus on that, we'll see if we're lucky enough to actually get the bill, and we may move to a full hearing on that bill. For the committee, on 2072, I mentioned that we would vote on that at our next opportunity. I would ask that you think about putting that on the consent agenda for the robust nature of the language in that bill. And we may try and do that on Monday, and then we'll probably take this bill up on Wednesday, where we would have perhaps more debate. But is there anything else for the good of the committee? Again, I'll remind us that we'll take up the informational hearing at our next meeting on next Wednesday. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you for your participation via WebEx or in the room.